From popular museums boasting a range of artifacts tied to our country's past, alongside a mess of associated restless spirits, to phantoms and chilling paranormal activity experienced right within the halls of our very Capitol building, which harbors more secrets than one might expect. Are you prepared to explore some of the most haunted places in Washington, D.C.? Number 5. The Omni Shoreham Hotel. The Omni Shoreham Hotel, located off Calvert Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and sitting adjacent to Rock Creek National Park, is a prominent and popular hotel that's acted as one of the city's preferred lodgings since the time of its opening. Historically, this hotel would be established as the Shoreham in 1930 under local real estate developer Harry M. Bralove, who envisioned his creation of what was to be D.C.'s Grand Dame. On March 4th of 1933, the first inaugural ball of U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was held at Shoreham, which would be fitted with special ramps and an elevator to accommodate his needs. Over the years, the site would continue to host inaugural balls for every subsequent standing president through the 20th century, and in February of 1964, Room 625, which is now a suite, would accommodate the legendary Beatles for 4 days, while they were on their first American tour. In 1983, the aged lodging would be acquired under Omni and would rebrand itself as the Omni Shoreham Hotel. The Omni Shoreham remains open into the present, offering unparalleled accommodations, and is recognized as a premier holiday destination from which one can learn about and experience firsthand the heritage of our great nation's capital. The most famous story surrounding the Shoreham intertwines with history to tell of Henry L. Doherty, who was accepted on as a minority financial partner to the hotel, and who moved with his family and maid Juliet into what is now Suite 870. Sadly, only months after their move, Juliet would die in the middle of the night, and though some tales tell the Doherty's daughter Helen would also perish within the suite, it's now known that she actually lived until 50 and passed on in Denmark. After the Dohertys moved on, their old apartment would remain unoccupied for nearly 5 decades before it was renovated into the suite we know today. Eerily enough, before Suite 870 was even open to the public, staff and guests in adjoining rooms would begin complaining of odd noises emanating from within the vacant space, of furniture found rearranged overnight, and of nearby housekeeping carts moving on their own, resulting in the room earning the nickname the Ghost Suite. Omni Hotel's manager Todd Scartazzi would stay in the Ghost Suite with his family for a time, during which he would witness the walk-in closet's light turning on and off on its own accord. And in 1997, a worker fell to his death from the suite's balcony during routine work, though some parties insist he was pushed by forces within. Lastly, and reported across the whole of the premises, is the constant feeling of never being alone, as if being constantly surrounded by a crowd unseen, as well as encounters with apparitions in attire spanning the building's history. Number 4. The Octagon Museum. The Octagon Museum, also known as the Octagon House or as the Colonel John Taylor III House, and located off of New York Avenue Northeast in the Foggy Bottom neighborhood of Washington, D.C., is a museum house recognized for being one of only 4 abodes to have served as the presidential residence in the history of the U.S., and of the 4, one of only 2 still standing. Historically, Colonel John Taylor III would purchase land the Octagon now sits upon in 1797, and 2 years later, in 1799, would construct the landmark location we know today, complete with a number of outbuildings, including laundry accommodations, a smokehouse, slave quarters, an ice house, and stables. Following the British destruction of the White House through the War of 1812, President James Madison, accompanied by wife Dolly, would move into the Octagon on September 8th of 1814, while White House repairs were underway. While the Octagon was initially intended as a winter residence, the Taylor family would end up living in the abode year-round from 1818 and onward. In 1828, John would pass on within, and following, his wife Anne would reside on site until her death in 1855. Preceding Anne's passing, the Taylor children would rent the expansive home out. By the 1880s, it was occupied by 10 families who resided apartment-style within its old rooms. In 1970, the premises was established and opened as a museum, and through the 1990s, the building's original appearance was restored. In the present, the Octagon Museum is operated under the American Institute of Architects Foundation and offers a range of exhibits, both permanent and alternating, guided and self-guided touring options, and, according to legend, its fair share of ghostly activity. Sadly, the Taylors enslaved hundreds of individuals, 12 to 18 of which worked at the Octagon. 2 of their children, as well as countless others, would pass on sight, and local legend tells the whole of the property is damned, haunted, or both, with staff and visitors reporting doors that open and close on their own, lights that flicker without cause, bells that ring inexplicably and all at once, the disembodied sounds of babies crying, and encounters with apparitions in old-fashioned attire. Some more popular stories tell of John arguing with 2 of his daughters at different times, and both occasions resulting in his girls being pushed over the main stair railing to their deaths. While these tales have since been debunked, as no grown children ever died in this manner on the property, it hasn't stopped witness accounts of extreme cold spots and disembodied screams and footsteps heard from staircases across the Octagon. And more modern speculations have since theorized someone else, possibly a slave, maid, or someone tied to the family by nefarious means, met the very same fate that tall tales have since fictitiously thrust upon the Taylor daughters instead. Lastly, the specter of a man in black clothing and a tall hat has been spied wandering about the house, and has been known to tip his brim to those who notice him before fading out of existence. And the spirit of Dolly Madison, wife of former President James Madison, has been encountered in the drawing room and is often accompanied by the pleasant scent of lilacs. Number 3. Lafayette Square. Lafayette Square, located within President's Park in Washington, D.C., and encompassed by H Street, Jackson Place, Madison Place, and Pennsylvania Avenue, is a 7-acre public expanse named in honor of French hero, aristocrat, and American Revolutionary War legend Gilbert du Motier, Marquis de Lafayette, that holds a number of iconic statues dedicated to European war heroes of the era. Historically, predating its establishment, lands the square now sit upon were utilized in a variety of endeavors, including in the holding of a racetrack, a graveyard, a zoo, a slave market, as an encampment for soldiers in the War of 1812, and in a number of political rallies, protests, and celebrations. Initially intended to act as an extension of the leisure landscaping surrounding the Executive Mansion, Lafayette Square was originally considered part of President's Park. However, in 1804, President Thomas Jefferson would order Pennsylvania Avenue cut through the park, resulting in its severing from White House grounds. In 1824, the park expanse would be named in honor of the Marquis, and in 1851, President Millard Fillmore would commission Andrew Jackson Downing to landscape the whole of the expanse into a picturesque styling. Through the 1970s, park grounds would be assaulted by waves of large eastern gray squirrels, an incident that would mark possibly the highest density of squirrels ever recorded in scientific literature, resulting in mass destruction of foliage and grounds, and eventually in efforts to relocate the furry little critters. Lafayette Square remains open into the present, offering its 5 large statues, being the central statue of President Jackson and 4 corner effigies honoring foreign heroes past, and is a popular haunt amongst both tourists and locals. Over its years, Lafayette Square has been surrounded in a number of scary stories and tales of the supernatural, one of the most popular of which telling of the Decatur House that sits on the park's northwestern corner and is named after naval war hero Commodore Stephen Decatur. This structure was initially constructed in 1818 and was, for a time, used in tandem with adjoining structures in slave trading, marking it as one of the only surviving examples of a slave quarters within an urban zone. According to both history and legend, in 1820, one Commodore James Barron would challenge Decatur to a duel, during which both men would discharge their pistols early, long before the count of 2, and would each hit their marks, though Barron would recover, while Decatur would succumb to his wounds. As soon as a year following, passers-by began reporting sightings of the ghost of Decatur in the second-floor window, and also marching toward H Street Northwest with dueling pistols in hand. Another brutal legend intertwined with history tells of one Philip Barton Key II, who, on February 27th of 1859, was killed at Lafayette Square by U.S. Representative Daniel Sickles. As the story goes, Key was involved in an affair with Sickles' wife, Teresa, and when Sickles caught Key throwing Teresa a signal with a handkerchief, he ran home, grabbed a pistol, rushed into the square, and shot an unarmed Key 3 times. The ghost of Key has been spied sulking about the square between 15th and 16th Streets, right near where he was shot, and usually with a handkerchief in hand, while an entity matching Daniel's description has been encountered, sporting a limp, some say tied to the losing of his leg later in life. Number 2. The United States Capitol Building. The United States Capitol Building, located off 1st Street Southeast in Washington, D.C., is widely recognized for its acting as meeting place of the U.S. Congress, as well as for acting as the seat of the legislative branch of the U.S. federal government. That's property, though no longer at the center of the federal district, actually forms the origin point for the encompassing 4-quadrant street numbers. Historically, initial sections of the Capitol were constructed in 1800. In the 1814 burning of Washington, some of said structures would be damaged and destroyed and would be later rebuilt. In 1850, the premises was expanded to more than double its original size, and in 1866, just after the American Civil War, the site's iconic dome was completed. In 1958, the Capitol would undergo another major expansion, including the addition of its east portico. In 1960, the dome would undergo a restoration. Later the same year, on December 19th, the whole of the property was declared a National Historic Landmark, and in 2008, the underground Capitol Visitor Center was established to ease strain under visiting masses. The Capitol remains open to visitors into the present, offering guided tours and educational programs while hosting numerous annual events. From its earliest days, the United States Capitol has played witness to the birth of numerous local legends and ghost stories, the first of which tells of John Linthal, who worked for architect Benjamin Latrobe. On its very construction, Linthal attempted to build an arch he was unfamiliar with, resulting in a total collapse when supports were removed, and in both the metaphorical and literal crushing of his person beneath the weight of his own failure. It's told that with his dying breath, Linthal had cursed the Capitol, and some maintain that this very same curse remains. A second fable tells of President John Quincy Adams, who, following his service as president, acted as a U.S. representative, during which time he'd join Honest Abe in opposition of the Mexican-American War. When the House voted on a measure to honor those who'd served in the war, it's told Adams viciously yelled out "No" before turning pale white and suffering a massive stroke, resulting in his death just 2 days later. To this day, many claim that if one listens closely enough, they can still hear his resounding "no" echoing through the halls of Congress and through time itself. A third legend tells of the 1,000 or so cots placed in Statuary Hall in 1862 for wounded Union soldiers, and of encounters with their full-bodied apparitions spied roaming amongst its statues, while a fourth details the events of the murder of Congressman William Preston Talby by a Louisville Times reporter, and of run-ins with his mumbling spirit in the stairwell, right near a stain that's viewable to this day, that's often attributed to his spilled blood. A fifth story tells of Bishop Sims, a barber who resided in the Capitol through the 1930s, who was as renowned for his haircuts as he was for the wisdom he'd impart on his clientele. Active in his church community, Sims had earned his honorary title as bishop from his clients, and was known to sing and hum hymns pleasantly while he worked, all the way up until his passing in 1934. Many frequenting the Capitol have told of disembodied humming and singing that, strangely, puts them at ease, that some suspect just may be Sims continuing his work from the other side. Saving what we feel is the best for last, a final legend dating back to at least 1862 tells of the Capitol's resident demon cat. While Union were temporarily housed and treated on site, several parties documented encounters with a threatening black cat that could grow to otherworldly proportions at will, or vanish in the blink of an eye in order to stalk its potential victims. It's said a set of claw marks from this unclean feline can still be viewed just outside of the old Supreme Court chamber, and it's rumored this none-too-friendly kitten made appearances before the assassination of Lincoln in 1865, preceding the stock market crash of 1929, and just prior to JFK's assassination in 1963. Number 1. Ford's Theater. Ford's Theater, located off of 10th Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., is a historic venue recognized as one of the oldest theaters in the whole of the country that's earned infamy for acting as site to the assassination of beloved U.S. President Abraham Lincoln on April 14th of 1865. Historically, land the theater now sits upon originally played home to the second meeting house of the First Baptist Church of Washington, which was constructed in 1833. However, in 1861, following the congregation's move to a newly fashioned building, one John T. Ford would purchase the former church site and would fully transform it into a theater he'd called Ford's Athenaeum. Sadly, the original Athenaeum was all but destroyed in a fire the following year in 1862. However, it was quickly reconstructed. Just 5 days following General Lee's surrender at the end of the Civil War on April 14th of 1865, President Lincoln, accompanied by his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, would attend a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater, during which time actor John Wilkes Booth would make his way into the presidential box and would shoot and kill Lincoln, before leaping down onto the stage and escaping through the rear door. Following the assassination, the U.S. government would appropriate Ford's Theater, ordering all future amusement on its grounds be prohibited indefinitely. Between 1866 and 1887, the property would be utilized by the U.S. military and would serve the War Department, and on June 9th of 1893, a good portion of the building's front section and 3 attached floors would collapse after earth was removed below a support pillar during excavation of the basement, though by 1894, sufficient repairs had been issued to allow for record and pension office clerks to use its bounds once more. In 1933, the property was acquired by the National Park Service, who would issue a series of renovations and repairs to its structure. Ford's Theater remains open into the present and stands as a National Historic Landmark, while acting as a museum site offering both the theater itself and the Peterson House. Long into its history, Ford's has been shrouded in rumors of paranormal activity and inexplicable phenomena, with those frequenting it reporting extreme cold spots, disembodied footsteps, and partially formed shadowy silhouettes that disappear when approached or noticed. Some activity across this aged site is thought to be tied to the 1893 building collapse, which resulted in the deaths of 22 clerks while leaving around 68 others injured, and ultimately, these oddly negative happenings would lead to several rumors suggesting the property was cursed. Strangely, Lincoln's former law partner and lifelong friend Ward Hill Lamon would recount a time in which the president had shared with himself, Mary Todd, and with a few select others, a dream, or rather a premonition he'd had of his own death, in which he was walking through the White House's East Room, through a crowd of mourners, towards a covered corpse surrounded by soldiers. In this vision, when Lincoln asked who died, one of the soldiers responded with, "The president, he was killed by an assassin." Following his shooting at Ford's Theater, Lincoln, unconscious and, in the era, most certainly mortally wounded, would be carried gently into the street by soldiers and Mary Todd, before he was called into a nearby boarding house by William Peterson, who let the soldiers into an unused room. Through the night, Mary Todd would wait in the parlor, checking on her husband from time to time, and the fallen president would receive a number of visitors, before passing on at 7:22 in the morning. To date, the full-bodied apparitions of both the president and of Mary Todd Lincoln have been sighted about the building, with Mary Todd most often spied leaning from the presidential box, as have the entities of a number of soldiers and unidentified civilians in clothing from the era. Lastly, employees of this weathered establishment who have remained inside after close have reported the phantom sound of a gunshot, followed by the screaming of a non-existent crowd, and sightings of the specter of none other than John Wilkes Booth himself, as he limps across the stage before disappearing from view. Taking its rather dark and fascinating history into account, and coupling it with a slew of terrifying legends and ghost stories for the ages, we felt there really was no better choice than Ford's Theater as the most haunted place in Washington, D.C. Thanks for tuning in for our picks for some of the most haunted places in Washington, D.C. If you enjoyed our histories and ghost stories, go ahead and subscribe to our channel, throw us a like, and share us with anyone you feel deserves a good scare. We'll see you all next time.